Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsoya, live in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Adefemi. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning to you all. I hope you're doing well. And I know you're warm. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that for sure. So let me tell you what is happening around the world today. Now, you'll remember during President Trump's post-inauguration speech, or during his inauguration speech, his first inaugural address, he made a lot of points. One of them was about gender, about how henceforth the United States would only recognize two genders, male and female. And while that drew a huge round of applause from the crowd, and definitely that reverberated online to a lot of people who are in support of those strict categories when it comes to gender, there are also many people who feel threatened, feel afraid. So on Tuesday, when the newly inaugurated President Trump, alongside the First Lady, as well as Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance, was sitting in the front row of the Washington Cathedral, the Washington National Cathedral, they had to listen to Reverend Marian Butt, make an impassioned plea towards them directly. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation. But the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here.
Well, that was an incredibly impassioned speech. Many people lauding the Reverend as bravely using her platform to advocate for people who feel ostracized by this new Trump presidency. Now, what you didn't see in that video were the reactions of the people she was speaking to. Now, we have seen footage of the live reaction of President Trump, and he remained very stoic. He and the First Lady were there was very little emotion in their face at all while they were listening to the Reverend. But however, Vice President J.D. Vance did turn to look at his wife, who kept her eyes on the stage, kept her eyes on the Reverend, almost gesturing with her eyes to like, my friend, will you keep your eyes forward, when she was making this plea about how LGBT communities and immigrants do feel very threatened by what has been coming in terms of the executive orders that have been signed, in terms of the rhetoric in the lead up to the election, post-election, and now post-inauguration. So when we are listening to what Donald Trump actually had to say, when he returned back to the White House, he did speak to members of the press. And when he was asked about what he thought about the church service, he said it wasn't very good. And you can draw the parallels as to why he felt it wasn't very good. And that is clearly something that is not going to do much to make any people who are feeling stressed in the lines of immigration or their gender identity, especially with what we've seen in the aftermath of that very impassioned plea from the Reverend. Now, moving on, yet still staying in the United States, Elon Musk is now under fire for a hand gesture he made on stage on Tuesday. He actually did it twice. And what the criticism essentially is about is that people feel as though him drawing his hand up at that angle was a salute to the infamous Hail Hitler salute of course, Nazi Germany. Something that definitely can be interpreted as incredibly offensive to many people around the world, especially Jewish communities and communities of people who were persecuted during Adolf Hitler's reign over Nazi Germany. Now, he has hit back at this criticism, saying that it's ridiculous, but he did, in fact, make that hand gesture. And whether or not the intentions behind that were that in line of the of being in line with Nazi Germany, it's not clear what his intentions are, even though he has denied it. Clearly, it has ruffled a lot of feathers. And to many people, it was a poor choice of bodily autonomy. It's not clear why he thought that that was the best way to do so, especially since he's on stage speaking to a crowd that might not necessarily be all far right, but definitely sympathetic to the right wing of politics when it comes to many issues, especially since we are talking about an administration which, in its very early hours, signed sweeping executive deals that looked at immigration, made essentially United States appear very hostile to illegal immigration. So it didn't do many favors for him, especially with the position that he's been given in terms of government efficiency. You'd think that he would know better. But when we're looking at Elon Musk's behavior, not just at the inauguration ceremony, but leading up to this point, there have been many examples of him perhaps not behaving the best way. And this was another example of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these stories before we move on to the papers.
I mean, God bless the Reverend. That's what anybody will have said. Any right-thinking person would have said. And I'm not shocked that Trump said the church service didn't go too good because he doesn't want to hear the truth. And the truth is, yes, there are people that might be illegal, but it doesn't mean they're criminals. They are the ones running the American economy. And we have seen this conversation. Femi, you remember the conversation around Brexit. You remember the hate against the Polish people and illegal immigrants. Today, is Britain not suffering for it? Absolutely. I keep giving the analogy of the car wash close to my place I would reside, just down in southeast in Belvedere, where a Polish guy will wash your car for you then for £5. You take it to the machine to wash your car, which will not wash as thorough as a Polish guy. He'll do it for over £20. You've pushed those people out today. Has Britain got any better? No. So please, Trump, have mercy. You might have a racist heart, but purge your heart of that racism. And for Elon Musk, we are not surprised. What he did was just simply signaling. That was a direct Nazi salute. You know, because when you look at groups like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and a couple of other far-right groups like that, they do things like this symbolism. That's just it. So, and that's why you see that there's a contention. Anytime any riots happen, Trump is also trying to point accusing fingers at other groups like Antifa, which means anti-fascist group. What he did was deliberate, and he knows. Guess what he started doing? The propaganda he started doing on Twitter. He started taking pictures of where people like Barack Obama raised up their hands to say they too, they also did the signaling. That's a lie. What he did was from his heart out. So we know the signaling of what he's doing. And it's reflective of this far-right movement. But historically, we know how Hitler started. We know how the likes of Benito Mussolini started with Popolo in Italia. And we saw how it ended. It's not a good sign for the world.
All right, well, going back to the Reverend, who is the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, the first woman to be elected to that position, and had the opportunity at the Washington National Cathedral to host the official inaugural prayer service for the president. The National Cathedral, Washington National Cathedral, has hosted 10 of such official inaugural prayer services for presidents of both parties, whether Democrats or Republicans. Now, it was the turn of Donald Trump, and he was there, you would see, alongside his vice president, his family members. But of course, what really caught the attention of the world wasn't the prayers and the fact that it was interfaith and the people who attended, but the words that she spoke. And There have been mixed reactions to this. Some people have said that, oh, she overstepped her boundaries. Why would she say such a thing? Well, while the president was there. But also, it's also an ode to free speech, which the president is quite big on in terms of truth. He runs Truth Social. So when it comes to speaking her truth, and there was no trace of malice or aggression in her voice when she passed the message. It was said very, like you mentioned, impassioned plea to the president to consider. She didn't also say that she acknowledged or recognized or was in support of LGBT, but to show mercy in the same way that he has received mercy from God, to show mercy to LGBT family people and immigrants, especially because the rhetoric is very important. And that's what a lot of people have spoken about with regards to Trump's advocacy or campaign against these groups. It's not just about what he's doing and the executive orders he's signing. It's the manner and way in which he is speaking and how it's inciting people to be more discriminatory to these groups. That is the big challenge. And that's where she came up with regards to, asking him for mercy. Let's see. I mean, he didn't seem to listen to or to hear that. Following what he said post that meeting, he had said that it wasn't any good. So I don't think it's like what they say in Nigeria, 1 year in and 1 year out, if at all he entered. But something else that I just wanted to spotlight this morning is Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders' criticism of Trump's inaugural speech. That's still in the spotlight in terms of people's reactions to his speech, inaugural speech. Some people have said it was inspiring, was forthright, was direct, didn't move away from what he had campaigned. But I thought he made some very salient points in his, in his short video. By the way, Bernie Sanders is the longest serving independent in congressional history, and he also is the chair of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pension. So he spoke to his constituents. He spoke to the things that really concerned him. What he highlighted, and I'll end here, is that Trump actually, it wasn't as important. What Trump didn't say was more important than what he did say. And that is that he didn't address some of the greatest concerns of families in the United States. The housing crisis, for instance. The fact that 800,000 Americans are homeless. The inequality, growing inequality between the rich and the poor. The threat of oligarchy. So very important point, because sometimes we can move away or we can get carried away by the showmanship and actually remember that not a lot of substance in terms of how American people themselves would be affected by his administration was addressed during that speech. I thought it was really great, analysis by Bernie Sanders.
Okay, I think there is much ado about nothing about the statement made by Right Reverend Bud. The priest is just doing what priests do. Priests give people hope. Priests, when they mount the pulpit, they try to preach inclusion. They try to preach, forgiveness. That all men of God, or what is it that the Bible tells us, that Jesus Christ came to save the whole of humanity. Absolutely. So it's not in the place of a priest to play the kind of politics of exclusion that is indicated by, some of the statements, executive orders signed by President Trump. And second, President Trump is a politician. And I've made the point that he has been very consistent. Now, by the very nature of the various pronouncements that he has made and that he's beginning to give effect to, people are bound to react, either on the pulpit or on the streets of Ukraine or elsewhere in the world, in Panama or in Greenland. Basically, because, Trump is going to append so many things and people are bound to talk. Already, 18 attorneys general of the democratic states in the United States, they've gone to court to challenge his executive order on birthright citizenship, to simply say that this is a constitutional issue, 14th Amendment, that has been there since 150 years ago. So it's not just the church, making an opinion. And Trump, of course, characteristically says, I don't think it was a good service. He dismissed it. But the conversation will continue as these policies and executive orders begin to take effect. As for Elon Musk, now Elon Musk plays far-right politics. He's supporting Tommy Robinson in the UK, a man who was jailed for sedition or for inflammatory statements. He's supporting the Alternative for Democracy, AFD, in Germany, which is also a far-right, body. Now, so anything he does that looks like a sign that he wants to project far-right politics will be seized upon by people and condemned. And that is why the Jewish community, mainly, has been saying that what he did that day, he placed his hand on his chest and then he raised his hand in a fashion that reminded people of Benito Mussolini, of the fascist party, a signal that was adopted by Hitler. And so what it means is that the memory of anti-Semitism, of Hitler, of fascism, is something that people are still bothered about. So if you make any gesture that looks close to it, you cannot blame people by saying, oh, this is it, particularly coming from a technological giant who is also a right-winger, either in the UK or in Germany or also in the United States, where he supported Donald Trump's campaign with $200 million. However, the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, which tracks anti-Semitism in the United States and which, collaborates with government on anti-Semitism issues, says no. What Musk did was in a fit of enthusiasm, and that he didn't mean, to promote any form of hate. Where the ADL is also already being criticized for trying to reconstruct what Elon Musk did. But Elon Musk himself says, look, all this reference to Hitler is so tired, he has dismissed it. But whatever it is, I think we cannot blame the people who have expressed concern, because we know the havoc that right-wing politics, anti-immigration politics, is causing in different parts of the world, especially in Europe. But as for Trump, I do not think that anybody is going to shift his position on immigration. He's already clamping down on immigrants. He has made it clear. And he has said, well, the official policy is that in the army, in government offices, the only two genders will be recognized, male and female. So that's the reality.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much for all of your analysis there. And I do agree with you, Dr. Mata. That really is the reality as we continue to march on in this new era of the world under Trump's leadership. But let's move on now to the newspaper review. We're looking at papers, of course, starting with This Day in Nigeria. And the front cover of This Day this morning is celebrating its own birthday, 30 years old today. And as it is celebrating its birthday, there's also the plan to make you all understand that though we do plan to celebrate formally on Monday, the 27th, happening in Davos tomorrow will be the presentation of some awards. That is, again, separate from the This Day Awards, which will still take place on the 27th of January, this coming Monday. But we do know that the presentation of first awards is set to begin in Davos. So we're looking forward to seeing those images. Arise News, as we know, has a great delegation currently at the forum with the likes of Adisu Amoran, Rotus Odiri too. So a great team out there. And arguably, as we have said many times, that This Day is Nigeria's most influential print media, and it started its publication weekly, actually, back in January of 1995, the 22nd of January 1995, and very quickly transformed into the daily paper we know it to be today. And here we are 30 years later. So a huge happy birthday to This Day and a huge congratulations to the great journalists at the newspaper that make these daily editions happen. Now, staying with This Day, they also look at a whole host of stories, but we will move on to the likes of the New Telegraph. And the New Telegraph this morning does lead with the Senate telling the federal government that a census must hold this year. Now, the last census was held some 19 years ago, and you've got senators essentially complaining that, and that was as early as Tuesday, senators have been complaining about the country's lack of population headcount, which means that there's a lack of credible data for proper planning instead of what they call a trial and error projection. So we will be very interested to hear if a census will be declared today, despite any logistical challenges that may come with the effort. Now, moving on to the Daily Independent this morning, and it stays with this dispute of the federal government lands, well, assets essentially, allegedly being sold in Kano. Now, members of the Nigerian Union of Railway Workers and Senior Staff Association of Communications Transport Corporation on the one hand, as well as the management of the Nigerian railway properties. They are going back and forth over the alleged sale and conversion of the corporation's property for private use in Kano. Now, while some of the NUR and the SSAC-TAC members claim that the corporation's property in Kano was unjustly converted to private use, the property management company and the president of the NUR both debunk claims of this sale or conversion of said property. So a lot of confusion happening there. Moving on to the Punch this morning, and the Punch has security in the southwest leading its front page. Now, the Amatikun Corps has mobilized over 2,000 personnel to flush out bandits and other criminals operating in the forests of southwest Nigeria. Ogun and Osun states top the list with targeted 1,000 recruits each, while Oyo State recruited 480 men last October as part of its efforts to curtail the influx of bandits into the southwest region. Moving on to the Vanguard, and the Vanguard has a picture of the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, shaking hands with Nigerian Vice President Kashim Shettima, who, as we know, is representing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Now, they are both the Man and Woman of the Year at the This Day Award, so it is quite fitting that the two of them are there together and, of course, shaking hands. Now, talking about the news on the front page of the Vanguard, it also reports on the Central Bank of Nigeria vowing to tackle the buying and selling of Naira notes. We've spoken at length about the commodification now of Naira and how it's very difficult for people to go to ATM machines and withdraw the currency of the country in their own country and having to resort to paying for currency at POS stores. Now, The Guardian, now let's move to the United Kingdom. And The Guardian of the United Kingdom has Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledging to overhaul the current existing terror laws in the United Kingdom amid a tidal wave, they are calling, of so-called online violence. So essentially he wants to strengthen and broaden these terror laws to include what we are seeing online. Just another example of the modernization of the world and how outdated laws need to catch up with what is the actual existing reality on the ground. And finally, The Independent, also from the United Kingdom, has more worries for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, especially with Donald Trump, because according to this article on The Independent, there is a worry that essentially the United States will be holding the United Kingdom over a barrel when it comes to trade, that they will be holding allegedly all of the cards in terms of trade negotiations in order for the United Kingdom, which is desperate to kickstart the slowing growth that we're seeing in the country. So it'll be very interesting to see what the dynamics are going to be like between a Labour government and a Republican administration happening there in the United States. Just many, many things happening around the world. So those are your newspapers from Nigeria to United Kingdom. Love to hear your thoughts if we've got the time.
Much, Adefemi. Certainly in the UK, there's a lot of worry about violence, knife, gang, terror, particularly with the revelations with the Southport killings involving Excel Rudakubana, who bought, a knife on Amazon, and questions also about what prevents the body, in the UK tracking gang violence is doing. Thank you very much indeed.